Hey, if you are cutting back on red meat, or you want an idea for a meatless Monday, or you don't eat meat but you want to feel like you are, I have a great recipe for you. If you're none of the above, I have a side dish made of potatoes and collard greens that is crispy and creamy at the same time and packed with flavor. So I have some vital wheat gluten, some chickpea flour or garbanzo bean flour, some black beans tamari sauce, garlic, pepper, and onion, tomato paste, some red wine, vegetable broth, and mushroom powder. And I am going to be making what's called a seitan, and it's basically a plant-based meat, if you want to call it that. I'm going to start by sauteing some onions and some garlic in a pan. And then I'm going to take 3/4 cup of black beans and put it into a blender cup. And then I'm going to add the sauteed garlic and onion in there with the black beans and some mushroom powder. And pay attention to the ingredients that are going in here. Some people are scared of seitan, but if you look at what we're putting in here, none of it's scary. Garlic, onions, black beans, mushroom powder, putting some pepper in there. These are all ingredients that most people like. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of tamari sauce and 3 tablespoons of tomato paste. And what I'm doing is making a mixture that I'm going to make a dough out of. And I'm trying to pack a lot of flavor into this mixture because that's what's going to give the dough a meaty flavor. So I'm going to also add a 1/2 cup of red wine. And this wine has no detectable sulfites. It's got a screw-on cap, and it probably costs, I think, $6, but it has no sulfites. So I'm going to put a 1/2 cup of this red wine in there. And that's what's going to make up the mixture. And now I'm just going to blend this until it's very smooth. Don't want any like chunks in there of onion or anything like that. So I'm going to give this blend until it is all smooth. And you can see it comes together there pretty quickly. I love this blender. It's got a lot of power behind it. All right. Now I've got my vital wheat gluten. We're going to add 2 3/4 cup of the wheat gluten. And gluten is what gives bread its texture, that little bit of chew that bread has. So we're using this along with a 1/2 cup of chickpea flour because it's going to give our dough a texture very similar to like a steak. And that's what makes this such a great option when you're looking to replace meat. We're packing a lot of flavor in, and then it's going to have that good texture to go along with the good flavor. So I'm just mixing the 2 flours together, and now I'm going to add the puree that we did in the blender and a 1/2 cup of vegetable broth. So you can see there's nothing scary in here. Most people don't have a problem with black beans, garlic, onion, tomato paste, tamari sauce, vegetable broth, all of the things that we've got in here, and some seasonings. It's definitely worth trying. I happen to think it is really, really good. I'm just going to mix this together until it's all incorporated, forms a dough like this, and then I'm just going to work with it just to get all of the flour well incorporated until it's smooth. I'm going to knead this for 12 to 15 minutes. This is not like a bread dough that you're gentle with. You're going to pound it.
I'm making the same thing.
You are?
Over there.
Let out all your frustrations, just pound away, because we want that gluten to be activated, and that's, again, what's going to give this such a great texture that resembles like a steak. So you just punch it, mess with it, throw it around, really get rough with it for a good 12 to 15 minutes. This is fun for Avi. So now I'm just going to roll this out a bit. You'll see it's kind of hard to roll out. So we're just going to roll it out a bit. Then I'm going to cut it into pieces. Now this is also really high in protein. So that's the other thing that makes it work really well for a meat substitute. It is high in protein. And if you look, let me just get that. If you look, it actually has a meaty look to it. And that's important because, again, we eat with our eyes, all of our senses we eat with. And it looks very similar to like a meat. So I've got all my pieces. I also have some bay leaves, thyme, sage, onions, garlic, vegetable broth, and red wine. And I'm going to quarter 2 onions and get them into a pan. I'm going to pour the remainder of my carton of vegetable broth in here. Remember, we used a 1/2 cup in the dough, so the rest of the vegetable broth I'm going to pour in here with the onions. And I'm going to add a good amount of garlic. Going to add some red wine, probably like a cup and a half of red wine. Going to add some fresh sage leaves, and I'm not bothering to chop these because this is like a broth that we're going to cook the seitan in. Don't have to chop it up. I'm going to strain this after it cooks. So going to add some thyme in there and a few bay leaves. So we're really packing in the flavor, not just with what we've put into the dough, but what we're cooking the dough in has a lot of flavor as well. I'm going to add some water, and you need a pretty good sized pan. I've got a pretty big pan here. I'm going to add some salt and I'm going to add some pepper. And now I'm going to bring this up to a boil. Once it's boiling, I'm going to turn it down to a simmer. So I've got it on low. I'm going to add the seitan into the pan. And you want to make sure, again, that you have a good sized pan because this expands a lot when it cooks, as you'll see. It's going to get a lot bigger. And you don't want it to overflow. You don't want it to be so crowded that your pieces don't submerge into the liquid here. So I'm just going to add it all in. And then what I'm going to do is let this simmer for an hour. Covered. So I'm going to get my pieces all in here, cover it, and just let that go for an hour. And an hour later, you can see they've expanded a lot. Do you see that? And it almost looks kind of like a roast or something at this point. So we cooked it once, but these get cooked again before you eat them. So for instance, if you want to eat it like this as a steak, you can put it on the grill. You can just sear it in a pan and get it heated up. I've taken these before and sliced them and made like a stir fry with them. You can use them in all kinds of dishes, and I've made like a Philly steak sandwich with them. And like I said, I really love it. I think it has great flavor. So I'm just going to get all of my pieces here into my container, and it makes a good amount too. Now I'm just going to strain this broth because I'm going to make a mushroom gravy to go with the steak, and I'm going to use this broth. Going to start on the side dish. I've got some garlic. I'm going to take 2 whole heads of garlic, chop off the tops like you see there, put it in some recycled foil. Avi was playing with the foil. I don't want to waste it, so I'm going to use it. And once it's in the foil, I am going to just drizzle it with olive oil. I know my camera work can't really be called work, but hey. Then you're just going to close the foil up around the garlic, put it in the oven. I set it at 350 and I let it roast for about 30 minutes. So I've got some sweet potatoes that I'm going to slice my mandolin, and they're pretty thin slices. And I used 1 large one. I have some potatoes. I think I ended up using about 5 potatoes that size. Did the same thing. Sliced them on the mandolin, soak them in some water, because you see all of that brownish in the water there. That's the starch, and I want to rinse that off. So I'm going to drain those potatoes and I'm going to wash my collard greens and then cut them into this size pieces. Going to cut all of it up like that. Now I've got my potatoes, sweet potatoes, collard greens. I'm going to get a baking dish, and I'm going to just stack these upright like that in my baking dish. So I'm going to alternate potato, sweet potato, collard greens, and just go around in a circle like that. And just going to fill up the entire dish. And going to do the same thing and make a little ring in the middle as well. This is super pretty, and having them stacked this way lets the edges crisp up, but the middle's going to be creamy because we're going to add some stuff in there that's going to make it creamy in the middle, crispy on the edges. So I've got my roasted garlic, and if you've never roasted garlic before, all you do is squeeze it out. It becomes super soft and sweet. I'm using a paper towel to squeeze it out because it's hot, but I'm going to get all of the roasted garlic on top. I've got some sage and thyme, and I'm going to chop up my sage and sprinkle that all around. This dish is packed with flavor. It is so good. It's dangerously good. It's actually dangerously good because when I go to put this away, I find myself picking at it. If Avi has any left on his plate, I find myself picking at it because it's just got so much flavor and it's so good. So I probably eat more of it than I should. Gonna do the same thing with the thyme. Gonna chop up the thyme and then add that on there. This is also great for like Thanksgiving. Again, just because it's pretty. I like to put pretty things out on Thanksgiving to make it feel like it's a special occasion. I'm gonna take some white flour, not a lot, maybe a tablespoon, and sprinkle that around like that. You could actually put the flour on the bottom of the dish. I kind of just forgot. Really, either way, it's gonna work. Gonna add some pepper, but I would have put it on the bottom if I had thought of it. Some salt. And I'm gonna add just a little bit of soy milk. Just like that. All right, I'm gonna cover this and bake it in a 375 oven for about a half hour. I'm gonna uncover it and let it cook for another 20 minutes or so. I'm searing my seitan steaks, and I think they look gorgeous. They look like steak to me. I haven't had steak in a long time, so maybe I'm wrong, but it looks like steak to me. Now I'm gonna make a gravy. I'm gonna take some onions and saute them in a pan. Once they have some color, I'm gonna add a container of sliced mushrooms in there. And I want to get some color on these mushrooms because I'm making a gravy right in this pan, and all of the bits on the bottom, I don't know if you can see that, see the bits, that's flavor, and that's gonna help flavor my gravy. So I'm gonna get some real color on there. Then I'm gonna take the broth that I strained and set aside and add that in with the mushrooms. This gravy is so good. I think gravy in general is so good. But this one has all of those flavors that we added earlier with the red wine and the garlic and the sage and thyme and all of the stuff we added in there earlier. So it's got again, a lot of flavor. This whole meal does. I'm going to take some cornstarch and I'm going to add some of the broth to the cornstarch. I don't want to add it directly into the hot gravy because it's going to be lumpy. It won't mix with the hot liquid, but this is room temperature liquid, so it will mix. And then once it's all mixed together, I'm going to pour it into the gravy, and it's going to thicken up like right away. That's called a slurry, what I just did. So I made a cornstarch and broth slurry, and then you pour it into a liquid once it's boiling, and that is when it will thicken up for you. And this one's actually a little thicker than I want, so I'm going to add a little more broth to it, but it does look good. And that is what I'm looking for, that consistency. I'm going to add some salt. Gonna add some pepper. And I'm gonna add some thyme in there. And again, this is already packed with flavor, so I don't actually need to add anything other than that. Here are the potatoes. You can see all of the edges crisped up, but the milk that we poured in there, the soy milk and the flour, made like a sauce that the potatoes absorbed in the middle. So they're like creamy in the middle, crispy on the edges, and the contrast in textures is part of what makes this so good. But we've got that roasted garlic, the sage, the thyme. It's just packed with flavor. And here is our steak with mushroom gravy, seitan steak, and potatoes. And Avi's pretty happy about it too. Look at that. Doesn't that look similar to meat to you? Even the center's got like a little, if you want to call it, a rareness to it. This is very good. Please give it a try just because I think that you'll be very happy that you did.